Myths and Legends of the Pacific Northwest. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. Myths and Legends of the Pacific Northwest by Catherine Berry Judson. Preface. In the days of the first grandfather, when the earth was young, the Indian, armed only with stone knife, stone hatchet, and bows and arrows, found himself confronted with the work of someone far greater and stronger than himself. This power, or powers, for there came to be many of them, had uplifted snowy mountain peaks, had cut deep canyons through the solid rock, had carved out mountain passes, and had blocked the passage of mighty rivers by great rocks and boulders. These powers were strong and brutal. They had enormous strength, and men of only human size were their prey, as helpless as flybug under the heel of the Indian. Tatoosh, the thunderbird who lived in the sky, was one of these powers. He shook the mountains with the flapping of his wings. The flashing of his eye was the lightning. He caught great whales instead of salmon for food. Only by crumbling a rock into powder so small that he could not even see it could he secure a piece small enough for the Indian to use as a salmon spear. Because Tatoosh is so terrible and the enemy of red men, his picture is painted and carved on their houses, their canoes, and canoe paddles, indeed everywhere, to soften his anger. Often Tatoosh, as shown in the photograph of the Chilkat blanket, is represented by a single eye, the terrible eye that flashes fire. There is no beneficent deity among these Indians of the Northwest. Sahel does not represent the same idea as that of Manitou, the Great Spirit, among the Eastern Indians. Yet Tai Sahel along the Columbia River and Old Man Above among the California Indians represent the clearest idea of a single governing spirit living in the sky. But they are not sure of his friendship. Among most of the tribes, on the other hand, there is an utter lack of any friendly deity, as among the Blackfeet of Montana, with whom Old Man is simply a trickster, half human, who nearly always gets the worst of it in his encounters with Coyote. So the Indian felt powerless against the gods who made the earth, the forces of nature which he could not understand. In his helplessness he was influenced by the animal life he saw about him. In the tragedies of the forest he saw the weaker, smaller creatures escape the larger ones only by cunning. So must he, by cunning, escape the anger of the gods. The crafty animals became his earth gods, and in time his helpers. Coyote, the weakest but craftiest of all the animals, became on the coast the chief of all the animals. Fox ranked second. The adventures of Coyote, like those of Yale, the raven of Alaska, are so many that no one could tell them all. Professor F.S. Lyman, however, groups them around 3 or 4 main heads: the theft of fire, the destruction of monsters, the making of waterfalls, and the teaching of useful arts to the Indians. Now, the animal people lived before the days of the first grandfather, long, long ago, when the sun was new and no larger than a star, when the earth was young, and the tall firs of the forest no larger than an arrow. These were the days of the animal people. People had not come out yet. Then Coyote said, "I want it to be foggy." So it was foggy. Then all the people came out. No one saw them come. Coyote said, "I want the sun to shine." So the sun shone, and the fog drifted away. Then the people were there. No one saw them come out. But with people there must needs be fire. Where did fire come from? This question, which has puzzled every tribe and nation, each has solved in its own way. With the Greek, as with the red man, fire was first only on a mountaintop, carefully guarded as a precious possession, and to be secured only by theft. Among the Greeks, a god took pity on shivering, unhappy mortals. Among the Indians, it was an animal god, usually Coyote, who stole it. With both peoples, mountains were the homes of supernatural beings. A comparison between Greek and red men may seem far-fetched to Greek scholars, yet there is a striking similarity, and it is one which is of peculiar interest to those who live within full view of the wonderful White Mountain. Olympus, rising above Homer's sounding sea, on which rode the black ships, was peopled with the immortal gods. Tacoma, lifting its snowy head above the waters of Woogi, on which rode the frail Indian canoes, was the home of the dreaded Tamanoas. With both peoples, the mountains were sacred. Avalanches and volcanic eruptions on Tacoma were caused by the Tamanoas, and nothing could tempt the red man to climb high above the snow line. If encamped below it, the Indian, awakened in the darkness by the sound of falling ice and snow, started from his blanket and sang a dirge-like song to appease the wrath of the spirits. Tacoma was associated with mystery and danger. No red man dared risk the fate of the miser. Indian nomenclature has been used entirely in this volume, since the myths, of course, date far back of the coming of the white man. In due time, it is believed, the Northwest will again come to use the beautiful Indian names instead of the commonplace ones given by the whites. There is no good reason why Kulshan, the Great White Watcher, should be called by the prosaic name of Mount Baker. Still less reason is there for calling Tacoma, the White Mountain, by the name of an English admiral, Rainier, who never saw the mountain and never came into the Northwest. Many Indian names, it is true, have been preserved, but the fate which the beautiful mountain peaks along the coast have suffered give reason for congratulation that Umatilla, wind-drifted sands, escaped being called Sandhole, and that Chelan, beautiful waters, is not on the map as Long Lake. The exact meaning of Tacoma is in dispute. It is given as the White Mountain and also as the fountain breast of milk-white waters. As Indian nomenclature was governed by the most striking physical feature of the thing named, be it man or mountain, the simple directness of the White Mountain seems to the writer to be more truly Indian. The most striking feature about Tacoma, as seen on any sunny day, is its intense whiteness. It is gloriously white, dazzling as it lifts its head 15,000 feet from sea level of the surrounding country into the deep blue sky. Therefore, the more expressive interpretation has been preferred. The basis on which these myths were selected necessarily excluded those which showed traces of the white man's religion or of the red man's coarseness. Relatively speaking, only a few myths could be selected. These were the creation myths, the origin of the races, the theft of fire, the salmon, and especially those connected with the physical features of the country, such as those of Tacoma, Shasta, the Columbia River, and the group of mountains of the Bridge of the Gods. The collection grew out of an effort to find, simply for personal amusement, a complete and authentic account of the legend of the Bridge of the Gods. It is one which is well known, yet I had difficulty in finding it, and the search revealed many quaint local myths that were practically inaccessible to the general reader. No claim is made for original work in this volume, except with regard to the selection of the myths and the rewriting of several in which the Indian simplicity and directness had been destroyed by attempted witticisms, by philosophical remarks, or by wordy explanations. A consistent effort has been made to tell these stories as the Indians told them. Some of the legends, such as the duration of life, Old Grizzly and Old Antelope, and the robe of Kemush, are almost literal translations from the Indian, as recorded by government ethnologists. With regard to the use of the name Kemush, it may be remarked incidentally that this is a popular and abbreviated form of the name Kemukamish. Neither is this volume intended to be a very serious or a learned one. It is, however, authentic. All myths for which a responsible authority could not be found have been rejected. The chief sources of information, used by permission, were the ethnological reports of the government, of learned societies, and such publications as the American Anthropologist and the Journal of American Folklore. The work of such ethnologists as Franz Boas, John R. Swanton, and Albert S. Gatschet has been freely used. Indebtedness is also acknowledged to Professor W. D. Lyman and Professor F. S. Lyman, to the work of Hubert Howe Bancroft, and to the writings of Louise McDermott, Alice C. Fletcher, Herbert J. Spindon, Roland B. Dixon, Mrs. R. S. Shackelford, J. Owen Dorsey, and others. Acknowledgement for courtesies received is also due to the photographers and to Lohman and Hanford of Seattle, but especially to Major Lee Morehouse of Pendleton, Oregon. KBJ, Seattle Public Library, July 15, 1910. End of preface. Part 1 of Myths and Legends of the Pacific Northwest by Catherine Berry Judson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1. The Origin of Daylight, Nanaimo modification of the Tlingit legend. When the earth was very new and young, it was dark and cold and gray. Even the stars were black. There was no light anywhere, for Gull kept it in a small box which he guarded carefully. His cousin, Raven, was tired of the dark. He wished for the daylight. One day, when Gull and Raven were out walking, Raven thought, "I wish Gull would run a thorn into his foot." Hardly had he thought so when, in the darkness, Gull stepped on a thorn. "Squaw, my foot!" cried Gull. "A thorn?" asked Raven. "Let me see it. I will take it out." But it was so dark, Raven could not see the thorn. He asked Gull to open the box and make it light. Gull opened it just a little way, and the light was very faint. Raven said, "You must give me more light." Gull answered, "Squena." So Raven pretended not to see the thorn. Instead of pulling it out, he pushed it in deeper and deeper, saying, "You must give me more light." "Squena, Squenan, my foot, cried Gull. Raven pushed the thorn in deeper and deeper until Gull at last opened the box. That is the way the daylight came. How Silver Fox Created the World. Hat Creek Indians at Tsugui. In the beginning there was nothing but water. Coyote and Silver Fox lived above in the sky, where there was a world like this one. Silver Fox was anxious to make things, but Coyote was opposed to this. Finally, Silver Fox got tired of Coyote and sent him one day to get wood. While he was gone, Silver Fox took an arrow flaker and made a hole in the upper world and looked down on the sea below. When Coyote came back, Silver Fox did not tell him about the hole he had made. Next day, he sent Coyote off again for wood. While he was gone, Silver Fox thrust down the arrow flaker and found that it reached to the water and down to the bottom of the water. So he climbed through the hole. As he came near the surface of the water, he made a little round island on which he stayed. When Coyote returned, he could not find Silver Fox, and after hunting a long time, he began to feel remorseful. Finally, he found the hole in the sky. He peeped through and saw Silver Fox on his island, far, far below. He called to Silver Fox. He was sorry, and asked how to get down. Silver Fox did not answer. Coyote said Silver Fox ought not to treat him so badly. Then Silver Fox put up the arrow flaker, and Coyote came down. But the island was very small, and there was not room enough for Coyote to stretch out. For some time they slept, and when they awoke they were very hungry. For 5 days things continued this way, until at last Silver Fox gave Coyote some sunflower seeds. He asked where they came from. Silver Fox did not answer. After 5 days more, Silver Fox made the island a little larger so that Coyote could have room to stretch out. At last he went comfortably to sleep. At once Silver Fox got up, dressed himself finely, and then made a big sweat house. When it was all done, he woke Coyote, who was much surprised to see the sweat house. Silver Fox told Coyote to sweep it out, to spread grass on the floor, and to go to sleep again. He did so, and Silver Fox dressed up again. He put on a finely beaded shirt and leggings, and smoked and sang more. Then, going outside, he pushed with his foot and stretched out the earth in all directions, first to the east, then to the north, then to the west, and last to the south. For 5 nights he repeated this until the world became as large as it is today. Each day Silver Fox told Coyote to run around the edge and see how large it was growing. At first Coyote could do this very quickly, but the last time he grew old and gray before he got back. Then Silver Fox made trees and springs and fixed the world up nicely. He also made all kinds of animals merely by thinking about them. These animals, however, were like people. When the world was all made, Coyote asked what they were going to have for food. Silver Fox did not reply. Coyote then said he thought there ought to be 10 moons of winter in the year. Silver Fox replied there would not be enough food for so long a winter. Coyote said it would be better not to have much food, that people could make soup out of dirt. Silver Fox at first did not reply. Then Silver Fox said it was not right to have 10 moons of winter, that 2 were enough, and that people could then eat sunflower seeds, roots, and berries. Coyote repeated what he had said before, and they argued about it a long time. Finally, Silver Fox said, "You talk too much. I am going to make 4 moons for the whole year. I won't talk about it any more. There will be 2 moons of winter, and 1 of spring, and 1 of autumn. That's enough." How Kemush created the world. Klamath. In the time that was, Kemush, old man of the ancients, slept in Yamsi Lodge of the north wind. Hard had been his work. Kemush had made the world. He had sprung quickly from the ashes of the northern lights and made the world at the call of Morning Star. At first, Kaila, the earth, had been flat and bare. Then Kemush planted in the valleys the grass and camas roots, iba and ipo roots. On Molaiksi steepness he had set Kapka, the pine, Wako, the white pine, and Katalo, the juniper. On the river and lakes, Kemush placed Wex, the mallard, and Waiwash, the white goose, Mushmush, the white-tailed deer, Wan, the red fox, and Ketchkatch, the little gray fox, ran through the forest. Coil, the mountain sheep, and Look, the grizzly bear, Kemush set on Kataiti, place of rocks. So made Kemush the earth, and all the earth was new except Shapashkani, the rock where was built the lodge of sun and moon. So Kemush slept while the day was young. Then came Wanaka, the sun halo, and called to the sleeping one, old man of the ancients. Kemush rose from the door of the lodge. Together they followed the trail of Shel, the sun, until they reached the edge of the dark. But Maidu, the Indian, was not yet created. Then Kemush, with his daughter Evening Sky, went to the place of the dark, to the lodges of the Munatalkni. 5 nights in a great circle about a vast fire they danced with the spirits of the dark. The spirits were without number, like the leaves on the trees, but when Shel called to the world, the spirits became dry bones. On the 5th day, when the sun was new, Kemush rose and put the dry bones into a sack. Then, as he followed the trail of Shel to the edge of the world, he threw away the bones. He threw them away 2 by 2. To Kataiti, place of steepness, he threw 2. To Kuyani Shikes, the crawfish trail, to Malakisi, steepness of snow, and to Kakasam Yama, mountains of the great blue heron, to each he threw 2 bones. Thus people were created. The dry bones became Maidu, the Indian, Ixpala, the people of the chipmunks, and last of all, Maklax, the Klamath Indian. Then Kemush followed the trail of Shel, the sun, climbing higher and higher. At the top of the trail he built his lodge. Here still lives Kemush, old man of the ancients, with his daughter Evening Sky, and Wanaka, the sun halo. The robe of Kemush. Klamath. Kemush, walking upon the earth after having created it, saw 5 lynxes sitting upon a tree. Kemush had on only a rabbit blanket. Kemush tore his blanket to pieces, saying, "The lynxes will be a good robe to me when I kill them." Picking up a stone, he threw it at the lynxes. One lynx jumped down and ran away. Kemush said, "Oh, it will not be a good mantle." Again he missed with a stone. Another lynx, jumping down, ran off. Kemush said, "Again one skipped away. Now my mantle will become small." The 3 lynxes sitting on the tree scoffed at Kemush. Again with a stone he missed the lynxes. Another one jumped down and ran away. Kemush said, "It will only cover my back." Picking up another stone, he missed the lynxes. Both, skipping down, ran away. Kemush began crying, "Loyi, loyan, layak, loyi, loyan, loyak." Again, gathering the pieces of his blanket, he pinned it together with splinters. Then, putting it around himself, started off. Not far away, an antelope with an aching tooth lay on a clearing. Spreading his rabbit blanket over the antelope, Kemush kicked it. Then he began searching for a stone knife with which to skin it. An antelope behind him ran off. Looking at it, Kemush said, "This looks like my antelope." Then the antelope of Kemush ran in front of him. Kemush saw his blanket on the antelope's back. He cried, "Stop! Stop! The people will make fun of you wrapped in my old rabbit blanket." How Kawanaka created the world. At first it was dark. There was neither wind nor rain. There were no people or animals. In the middle of the water, on a piece of land, sat Kawanaka. He sat by his fire, breathing the smoke of burning cedar. On the edge of the land stood another god. Looking northward, he saw an ash tree. Looking southward, he saw a red cedar. Therefore the ash and red cedar are sacred above all other trees. Looking southwest, he saw something red. Said Kawanaka, "It must be land coming." At last the land came and touched the piece on which they sat. But it was unsteady. It trembled. Then Kawanaka pressed his hands over it, making it steady. He wanted to make more land, but he did not wish sickness to be in it. He said, "Where many die, I will make much water and little land. Where few die, I will make much land and little water." Kawanaka chose 3 rocks and 2 pieces of earth. He threw one rock into the water. Then he listened. It went down, down, down. He threw another rock, and then the third. Then he threw a piece of earth. He listened. He threw the other piece of earth. After the 5th throw, mighty waves arose. They dashed against the land, then receded. Thus were the tides formed. Then more land came, but it was muddy. Man could not step on it. Soon footprints appeared. "Ha," said Kawanaka, "that is sickness. It is bad." So he made the water cover the land. Then he blew at the water and uncovered the land. Again footprints came in the mud. "That is bad. That is sickness," said Kawanaka. 4 times he made water cover the land. The 5th time the footprints were made as before. Kawanaka let them alone. 5 is a sacred number. All this time it was dark. Kawanaka tried to make daylight, but could not. Then he called all the birds to a great council. He asked them how to make sunlight. Only one bird knew. He said in the far north was the sun. 2 wild geese had been there. The geese said there was a magic way of calling the sun. They would teach Kawanaka if he would give special privileges to all birds. So Kawanaka learned the secret and called the sun. It came at his call and stopped as he told it. So Kawanaka made a track for the sun, northward in summer, southward in winter. Kawanaka pulled 2 hairs from his head and threw them on the ground. They became snakes. Soon there were many on the land and in the water. They made storms by blowing with their mouths. One long serpent coiled itself 5 times around the world, so it does not fall apart. Kawanaka pulled 2 more hairs from his head. They became dogs. Afterwards, a woman came from the south. She is the mother who never dies. She is the South. All Indians return to her at death, and she sends them back as infants. Kawanika now lives in the sun and looks down on the people. How Old Man Above Created the World. Shasta Indians. Long, long ago, when the world was so new that even the stars were dark, it was very, very flat. Cheriya, Old Man Above, could not see through the dark to the new flat earth. Neither could he step down to it because it was so far below him. With a large stone he bored a hole in the sky. Then through the hole he pushed down masses of ice and snow until a great pyramid rose from the plain. Old Man Above climbed down through the hole he had made in the sky, stepping from cloud to cloud until he could put his foot on top the mass of ice and snow. Then, with one long step, he reached the earth. The sun shone through the hole in the sky and began to melt the ice and snow. It made holes in the ice and snow. When it was soft, Cheriya bored with his finger into the earth here and there and planted the first trees. Streams from the melting snow watered the new trees and made them grow. Then he gathered the leaves which fell from the trees and blew upon them. They became birds. He took a stick and broke it into pieces. Out of the small end he made fishes and placed them in the mountain streams. Of the middle of the stick he made all the animals except the grizzly bear. From the big end of the stick came the grizzly bear, who was made master of all. Grizzly was large and strong and cunning. When the earth was new, he walked upon 2 feet and carried a large club. So strong was Grizzly that Old Man Above feared the creature he had made. Therefore, so that he might be safe, Cheriya hollowed out the pyramid of ice and snow as a teepee. There he lived for thousands of snows. The Indians knew he lived there because they could see the smoke curling from the smoke hole of his teepee. When the paleface came, Old Man Above went away. There is no longer any smoke from the smoke hole. White men call the teepee Mount Shasta. Old Man Above and the Grizzlies. Shasta Indians. A long time ago, while smoke still curled from the smoke hole of the teepee, a great storm arose. The storm shook the teepee. Wind blew the smoke down the smoke hole. Old Man Above said to Little Daughter, "Climb up to the smoke hole. Tell Wind to be quiet. Stick your arm out of the smoke hole before you tell him." Little Daughter climbed up to the smoke hole and put out her arm. But Little Daughter put out her head also. She wanted to see the world. Little Daughter wanted to see the rivers and trees and the white foam on the bitter waters. Wind caught Little Daughter by the hair. Wind pulled her out of the smoke hole and blew her down the mountain. Wind blew Little Daughter over the smooth ice and the great forests down to the land of the grizzlies. Wind tangled her hair and then left her cold and shivering near the teepees of the grizzlies. Soon Grizzly came home. In those days, Grizzly walked on 2 feet and carried a big stick. Grizzly could talk as people do. Grizzly laid down the young elk he had killed and picked up Little Daughter. He took Little Daughter to his teepee. Then Mother Grizzly warmed her by the fire. Mother Grizzly gave her food to eat. Soon Little Daughter married the son of Grizzly. Their children were not grizzlies, they were men. So the grizzlies built a teepee for Little Daughter and her children. White men call the teepee Little Shasta. At last Mother Grizzly sent a son to Old Man Above. Mother Grizzly knew that Little Daughter was the child of Old Man Above, but she was afraid. She said, "Tell Old Man Above that Little Daughter is alive." Old Man Above climbed out of the smoke hole. He ran down the mountainside to the land of the grizzlies. Old Man Above ran very quickly. Wherever he set his foot, the snow melted. The snow melted very quickly and made streams of water. Now Grizzly stood in line to welcome Old Man Above. They stood on 2 feet and carried clubs. Then Old Man Above saw his daughter and her children. He saw the new race of men. Then Old Man Above became very angry. He said to grizzlies, "Never speak again. Be silent, neither shall ye stand upright. Ye shall use your hands as feet. Ye shall look downward." Then Old Man Above put out the fire in the tepee. Smoke no longer curls from the smoke hole. He fastened the door of the tepee. The new race of men he drove out. Then Old Man Above took Little Daughter back to his tepee. That is why grizzlies walk on 4 feet and look downward. Only when fighting they stand on 2 feet and use their fists like men. Duration of life. Klamath. Kemush, Old Man of the Ancients, ruled as follows. The Klamath Lake people, Maklaks, from a serviceberry bush, from Chak he made. He made the Kakalish people from skunks. Northward, while he had gone, he created them on his way. Klamath Lake people he laid down in the sun heat. The white people he laid in the shade. Therefore the Maklaks are dark. The white race is light, and beyond the sea he made a world for them. Kemush made mole also, flybug also, garter snake also. When he had made them, they began to argue about man. Mole said, "I want human beings to live to great age." Garter snake thus spoke, "I order man to be thus made." Garter snake began shedding its skin, saying, "This way I want man to become, after having grown to be of great age, always to grow young again." On that subject Mole said, "And I want human beings to be thus made, decrepit by age." Shivering, he said, "Thus I want human beings to shiver." Flybug also voted with Mole. Flybug said, "Many human beings acting cruelly will step on me and crush me." And thus they argued. How Coyote Stole Fire. Long ago, men were hungry and unhappy. They were cold. The only fire in the world was on a mountain top, watched by 3 skookums. They guarded the fire carefully. Men might steal it and become as strong as they. Coyote wanted men to be warm and happy. One day he crept to the mountain top and watched the skookums. He watched all day and all night. They thought he was only a skulking coyote. Coyote saw that one skookum sat always by the fire. When one went into the tepee, another came out and sat by the fire. Only when the dawn wind arose was there a chance to steal fire. Then Skookum, shivering, hurried into the tepee. She called, "Sister, sister, get up and watch the fire." But the sister was slow. Coyote went down the mountainside and called a great council of the animals. He knew if he stole fire, the Skookums would chase him. Coyote said the other animals must help him. Again, Coyote skulked to the mountain top. The Skookums saw only a coyote shivering in the bushes. When the dawn wind rose, the Skookum on guard called, "Sister, sister, get up and watch the fire." But the sister was slow. Then Coyote seized the fire and jumped down the mountainside. Quickly Skookum followed him. She caught the tip of his tail in her hand. Therefore it is white even to this day. But Coyote reached Wolf. Wolf seized the fire and leaped down the mountain. Skookum chased Wolf, but Wolf reached Squirrel. Squirrel seized the fire and leaped from branch to branch down the mountain. The fire was so hot it burned the back of his neck. You can see the black spot there even to this day. The fire was so hot it made Squirrel's tail curl up over his back. Skookum chased Squirrel, but Squirrel reached Frog. Frog took the coals of fire in his mouth and hopped away. Skookum chased Frog. She caught his tail in her hand. Frog jumped away, but Skookum kept the tail. That is why frogs have no tail even to this day. Soon Skookum caught up with Frog again. To save the fire, Frog spit it out on wood. Wood swallowed it. Skookum did not know how to get the fire out of wood, but Coyote did. Coyote showed the Indians how to get fire out of wood by rubbing 2 dry sticks together, as they do even to this day. How Beaver Stole Fire. Nez Perces. Long ago there were no people in the world. Animals and trees talked just as men do now. They also walked about. Now in those days pine trees had the secret of fire. They would tell no one else. No one could have a fire, no matter how cold it was, unless he were a pine. One winter it was so cold the animals almost froze to death. Then they called a council. They wanted to steal fire from pine trees. Now on Grand Ronde River, pine trees were holding also a great council. They had built a large fire to warm themselves. Guards were put around the fire to keep off all animals. But Beaver hid under the bank near the fire before the guards took their places, so they did not see him. After a while, a live coal rolled down the bank near Beaver. He hid it in his breast and ran away. Pine trees started after him. When pine trees caught up near him, Beaver dodged from side to side. Other times he ran straight ahead. That is why Grand Ronde River winds from side to side in some places. In other places it is straight. When they had run a long way, pine trees grew tired. They stopped on the river banks. So many stopped there and so close together that even today hunters can hardly get through the trees. A few kept on after Beaver and stopped here and there. These also remain here and there on the river bank. A few pine trees kept close after Beaver. So did Cedar. Cedar said, "I will run to the top of that hill. I will see how far ahead he is." So Cedar ran to the top of the hill. Beaver was far ahead. He was just diving into Big Snake River, where Grand Ronde joins it. Beaver swam across Big Snake River and gave fire to willows on the opposite bank. Farther on he gave fire to birches and to other trees, so these woods have fire in them. Ever since then, animals and Indians can get fire from these woods by rubbing two pieces together. Cedar still stands all alone on the very top of the hill. He is very old. His top is dead. The chase was a long one. You can see that because there are no other cedars within 100 miles of him. Old men of the tribes point him out to the children. They say, "There is old Cedar. He stands just where he stopped when he chased Beaver." How Dog Stole Fire. Pit River, Akomawi. Pine Marten stole the two wives of Hawkman. Hawkman grew very angry and at once put on his shaman's ornaments and began to dance and sing, "Kicha, kicha, winino, kicha, kicha, winino." At once it began to rain. Only Weasel noticed it and spoke of it. All night it poured. The water rose higher and higher until it ran in at the door. "Tell them to go back, these two women. That Hawkman will kill us. He will drown us." But Pine Marten said nothing until morning. Then he said, "I do not like this. Where is a brave man? I want him to go and kill Hawkman." So a man got up and went over, taking a knife and a shield. Hawkman was dancing harder and harder, and at every leap his head came up through the smoke hole. The man crept nearer and nearer, and finally struck Hawkman. He cut off his head. At once the rain stopped, and the clouds cleared away, and the water sank. Then people said, "If a shaman is bad, we will kill him. That is how it shall be." And then they went off to hunt. After Hawkman had been killed and the waters had sunk again, people found that the fires were put out all over the world. Nothing could be cooked. For a time they did not trouble about it, but in a few days they began to talk about it. They sent Owl to Shasta to look out over all the world and see if he could find any trace of fire. Owl took a feather blanket and went. Lizard watched him go and told the people how he was getting on. After a long while, when Owl did not come back, people thought he was dead. But Lizard said, "Shh, I can see him." Owl got to the top at last, very tired and wet with sweat. He looked all around. Twice he looked to the west, and there saw smoke coming from a sweat house. After a while, Owl came down from the mountain and told the people what he had seen. Next morning, all got ready and went off to the west, to where the smoke had been seen. Everyone had a cedar bark torch. Dog had some punk hidden in his ear. Late in the evening they arrived at the lodge and asked to be allowed to warm their hands. Dog held his ear down, and fire caught in the punk. Then everyone thrust their torches into the fire and ran. The people in the lodge were angry and struck at them as they ran off. Coyote's fire gave out first, then the fire of one after another gave out until all the torches were out. The people who owned the fire had made it rain, and this put out the torches. No one knew that Dog had fire. They got home and were much troubled, for they thought the fire had all been lost. Dog was laughing and said, "I am sweating." Coyote got angry at this and said, "Hit him, put him out." Then Dog said to Fox, "Look in my ear." When he did that, he saw the fire. He took out the punk, made fire from it, and so people got fire again. End of section 1. Part 2 of Myths and Legends of the Pacific Northwest by Catherine Berry Judson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2. The Bridge of the Gods. Long ago, when the world was new, Tai Sahal with his 2 sons came down Great River. They came near where the dales are now. The land was very beautiful, and each son wanted it, and therefore they quarreled. Then Sahel took his bow and shot 2 arrows. One he shot to the north, and the other he shot to the west. Then Sahel said to his sons, "Go, find the arrows. Where they lie, you shall have the land." One son went north over the plain to the country of the Klickitats. He was the first grandfather of the Klickitats. The other son followed the arrow to the Willamette Valley. He was the first grandfather of the Multnomas. Then Sahel raised great mountains between the country of the Klickitats and the country of the Multnomas. This he did that the tribes might not quarrel. White men called them the Cascade Mountains, but Great River was deep and broad. The river was a sign of peace between the tribes. Therefore Sahel made a great stone bridge over the river that the tribes might be friends. This was called the Bridge of the Tomonawas. The tribes grew, but they did evil things. They displeased Tai Sahel. Therefore the sun ceased to shine, and cold and snow appeared. The people were unhappy, for they had no fire. Only Luit had fire. Therefore the people sought to steal the fire of Luit. Then Luit fled, and because the runners were stiff with cold, they could not catch her. Then Luit told Sahel of the need of the Indians. Luit said the Indians were cold, so Sahel gave fire to the people. Thus Sahel built a fire on the Bridge of the Gods, and there the people secured fire. Sahel also promised to Luit eternal youth and beauty. Thus Luit became a beautiful maiden. Then began the chiefs to love Luit. Many chiefs loved her because she was so beautiful. Then came 2 more chiefs, Klickitat from the north and Waist from the west. To neither would Luit give an answer. Therefore the chiefs fought, and their people also fought. Thus did they anger Sahel. Therefore, because blood was shed, and because Great River was no longer a sign of peace, Sahel broke down the Tomonawas Elehi. Great rocks fell into the river. They are there even to this day. When the river is quiet, buried forests can be seen even to this day. Thus Sahel destroyed the Bridge of the Gods. Thus the tribes were separated by Great River. Then Sahel made of Luit, Klickitat, and Waist snow peaks. Always they were to be cold and covered with ice and snow. White men called them Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, and Mount Hood. The Dales. Long ago, after Sahel had broken down the Bridge of the Gods, Klickitat and Waist still quarreled over Luit. When they quarreled, sheets of flame burst from their peaks, and they threw great rocks at one another. But Klickitat and Waist did not throw far enough. The rocks fell into the great river and blocked it. Therefore the river is very narrow and very swift at that point. Thus it is called the Dales. The story of Ashish, Klamath. Ashish, they say, having many people with him, gambled. While on their way gambling, they built fires. Purple-blue was the fire of Ashish, the fire of Silver Fox was yellow only, the fire of Kemush was smoke only. Then they shot at the target. Ashish hit it straight, Silver Fox slightly missed the mark, and Kemush hit the side of the mark. All the others struck far this side of the mark. After doing so, they began gambling again. They bet on many things. Then Ashish won over them. About noon, all the men had lost all they had. Then they went to their lodges. Now Ashish had 5 wives. Mudhen was one wife of Ashish. Longtail Squirrel was one wife. Sandhill Crane was one wife. Mallard was one wife. Chaffinch was one wife. Then Kemush plotted secretly. After daybreak he plotted against Ashish. Then Kemush began to weep, pretending to remember the inherited place where his father had killed eagles. Now declared Kemush to Ashish, "Far away is the killing place of the young eagles. I kill them not, being afraid." Then they set out together, Kemush and Ashish. Now Kemush coveted Little Squirrel, the wife of Ashish. Then they saw eagles. Kemush pointed out the pine for Ashish to climb up. Then the eagles flew on the pine. Ashish climbed up, but as he climbed, the tree grew. Far up, the pine now touched the sky. Ashish, having climbed to the top, saw only the young ones of a lark, although it was the eyrie of an eagle. Thus Ashish wept, sitting in the eyrie. Then Kemush went away. He dressed himself to appear like Ashish. He came back to the lodge from the pine tree. Now the wives of Ashish became suspicious. "This one is Kemush," thus said the wives of Ashish. Next morning they all went with those who were in the habit of gambling with Ashish. They built a fire while gambling, and from the fire of Kemush smoke only curled up. Then they suspected and said, "This is not Ashish. This is Kemush." Thus said those far off, "Ashish did not come. The fire of Ashish is not burning there." Thus said the followers in the distance. Those in the distance also said, "Ye will find out this man after he has shot at the mark. Ashish always hits straight." Then they shot. Kemush struck far this side of the mark. Silver Fox missed a little. Then they commenced gambling, and they won over Kemush. All day long they won many stakes, and then they went back to the lodges. Then they quit gambling, for they missed Ashish. Now Ashish's wives wept constantly and left their lodges to dig roots. 4 wives put pitch on their heads. Only Mallard mourned not for Ashish. Then Ashish heard the weeping cries of Sandhill Crane, and Ashish wept hearing them. Now Ashish was far away, close to the sky. He was nothing but bones. Then 2 butterflies flew up close to the sky and saw Ashish. Then they flew back, having seen him. They returned home and said to their father, "A good man will soon perish. Far off, close to the sky, we saw that man, nothing but bones. He will soon die." Thus they said to their father. The father ordered them early next morning to fly up with a basket strung around them. So the butterflies carried up their food, carrying water also. They raised up Ashish in that eyrie. Then inquired those butterflies, "What are you doing up here?" Then Ashish said, "Kemush sent me after the eagles, and I climbed the small pine, and it grew up under me. The pine grew up during my climbing. Then I saw eagles. Of the lark saw I only the young." So Ashish said, giving explanations to them. Then the butterflies spread a wildcat skin in the willow basket. They placed Ashish in it, after giving him food, giving him water also. Then they took him in the basket down to the ground. Thus he returned. Then he lay sick a long time, and then he recovered. Creation of mankind. Pit River, Akomawe. Silver Fox and Coyote lived together. Silver Fox gathered some serviceberry sticks and whittled them down, working all night. The shavings were to be made into common people. The finished sticks were to be warriors and chiefs. About sunset the next day he was ready to make them alive. They turned into people. Then Silver Fox sent them away, some in one direction and some in another. Then he and Coyote had a big feast. But Coyote wanted also to make people, so he did everything he had seen Silver Fox do. He gathered some serviceberry sticks and whittled them down, working all night. About sunset the next day, he was ready to make them alive. They turned into people. Then Coyote ran after some of the women, and after a long chase caught them. But so soon as he touched them, they turned into shavings. Asayaho, Tillamook. Asayaho, the god, lived far up in the country. A long time ago he traveled all over the world. He came down the river and arrived at Nadats. There he gathered clams and mussels. He made a fire and roasted them. When he opened them, he found 2 animals in each shell. After he had roasted them, he began to eat, and soon had enough. That made him angry, and he said, "Henceforth there shall be only 1 animal in each shell." The god came to Tillamook Bay, and then went up the river. He had to cross it far up, because he had no canoe and the river was deep. He met a number of women who were digging roots. He asked, "What are you doing there?" They replied, "We are digging roots." He said, "I do not like that." He took the roots away and sent them to Clatsop. Ever since that time there have been no roots at Tillamook, while at Clatsop they are very plentiful. He went on and came to a river full of salmon, which were clapping their fins. He caught one of them, threw it ashore, stepped on it, and flattened it. It became a flounder. Ever since then, flounders have been plentiful at Tillamook, while there have been no salmon there. Asayal traveled on and came to a house in which he saw people lying around the fire. He asked, "What is the matter? Are you sick?" "No," they replied, "we are starving. East Wind wants to kill us. The river, sea, and beach are frozen over, and we cannot get any food." Then he said, "Can't you make East Wind stop blowing so you can secure food?" He went out of the house and far up the river, which was frozen over. It was so slippery he could hardly stand. He went up the river to meet East Wind and to conquer him. Before he came to the house of East Wind, he took up some pieces of ice, which he threw into the river, saying, "Henceforth it shall not be as cold as it is now. Winter shall be a little cold, but not very much so. You shall become herring." The ice at once became herring and swam down the river. Asayal went on until he reached the house of East Wind. He entered and whistled. He was trembling with cold, but did not go near the fire. He said, "I am so warm I cannot go near the fire." Then he told East Wind he came from a house where they were drying herring. East Wind said, "Don't say so. It is winter now. There will be no herring for a long time to come." Asayal replied, "Don't you believe me? There are plenty of herring outside." He took an icicle, which he warmed at the fire. "Look how quickly it boils," he said to East Wind as the ice melted. He made East Wind believe that the melting ice was a herring. Then East Wind ceased to blow. The ice began to melt, and the people had plenty of food. Until then it had been winter all the year. Now we have both summer and winter. The Golden Age, Tinni. Long ago the world was only a great sheet of water. There was no land. There were no people. Only the thunderbird lived. The beating of its wings was thunder. Its glance was lightning. Then the thunderbird flew down and touched the water, and thus the earth arose. Then the thunderbird flew down again and touched the earth. Thus the animals were created. Thus Thunderbird created all living things except people. Dog was the ancestor of the Tinni. Then Thunderbird gave to the Tinni a sacred arrow. This arrow was never to be used or lost. Thus the Tinni, because of the sacred arrow, never died. Men wore out their throats with eating. Men lived so long their feet wore out from walking. Thus the Tinni were happy. Then they disobeyed Thunderbird. They used the sacred arrow. Therefore arrow flew away. Thus the Tinni now die, as do other Indians. The first totem pole, as told by Natalie Curtis, Quakitil. Once there was a chief who had never had a dance. All the other chiefs had big dances, but Wakiash none. Therefore Wakiash was unhappy. He thought for a long time about the dance. Then he went up into the mountains to fast. 4 days he fasted. On the fourth day he fell asleep. Then something fell on his breast. It was a green frog. Frog said, "Wake up." Then Wakiash waked up. He looked about to see where he was. Frog said, "You are on Raven's back. Raven will fly around the world with you." So Raven flew. Raven flew all around the world. Raven showed Wakiash everything in the world. On the fourth day, Raven flew past a house with a totem pole in front of it. Wakiash could hear singing in the house. Wakiash wished he could take the totem pole and the house with him. Now Frog knew what Wakiash was thinking. Frog told Raven. Raven stopped, and Frog told Wakiash to hide behind the door. Frog said, "When they dance, jump out into the room." The people in the house began to dance. They were animal people, but they could not sing or dance. One said, "Something is the matter. Someone is near us." Chief said, "Let one who can run faster than the flames go around the house and see." So Mouse went. Mouse could go anywhere, even into a box. Now Mouse looked like a woman. She had taken off her animal clothes. Mouse ran out, but Wakiash caught her. Wakiash said, "Wait, I will give you something." So he gave her a piece of mountain goat's fat. Wakiash said to Mouse, "I want the totem pole and the house. I want the dances and the songs." Mouse said, "Wait until I come again." Mouse went back into the house. She said, "I could find nobody." So the animal people tried again to dance. They tried 3 times. Each time, Chief sent Mouse out to see if someone was near. Each time, Mouse talked with Wakiash. The third time, Mouse said, "When they began to dance, jump into the room." So the animal people began to dance. Then Wakiash sprang into the room. The dancers were ashamed. They had taken off their animal clothes and looked like men. So the animal people were silent. Then Mouse said, "What does this man want?" Now Wakiash wanted the totem pole and the house. He wanted the dances and the songs. Mouse knew what Wakiash was thinking. Mouse told the animal people. Chief said, "Let the man sit down. We will show him how to dance." So they danced. Then Chief asked Wakiash what kind of a dance he would like to choose. They were making masks for the dance. Wakiash wanted the echo mask and the little man mask, the little man who talks, and quarrels with others. Mouse told the people what Wakiash was thinking. Then Chief said, "You can take the totem pole and the house also. You can take the masks and dances for one dance." Then Chief folded up the house very small. He put it in a dancer's headdress. Chief said, "When you reach home, throw down this bundle. The house will unfold, and you can give a dance." Then Wakiash went back to Raven. Wakiash climbed on Raven's back and went to sleep. When he awoke, Raven and Frog were gone. Wakiash was alone. It was night, and the tribe was asleep. Then Wakiash threw down the bundle. Behold, the house and totem pole were there. The whale painted on the house was blowing. The animals on the totem pole were making noises. At once the tribe woke up. They came to see Wakiash. Wakiash found he had been gone 4 years instead of 4 days. Then Wakiash gave a great dance. He taught the people the songs. Echo came to the dance. He repeated all the sounds they made. When they finished the dance, behold, the house was gone. It went back to the animal people. Thus all the chiefs were ashamed because Wakiash had the best dance. Then Wakiash made out of wood a house and another totem pole. They called it Kalikwiwish, the pole that holds up the sky. Spirit of Snow. Spirit of Snow did not like people. He was very stingy. Spirit of Snow did not wish that people should eat of the deer and elk. Therefore the Indians did not like him. Therefore, when too much snow fell, the Indians outwitted Spirit of Snow. They said a charm to him. They said this to Spirit of Snow, "Hither drive the elk, the black-necked ones that dwell back to the mountains, in dark places under the trees." Thus it was customary to speak to Snow. Then it no longer snowed. Again he became quiet. Snow is stingy. He does not desire to drive down elk. Owl and Raven. Eskimo. Owl and Raven were close friends. One day Raven made a new dress, dappled black and white, for Owl. Owl, in return, made for Raven a pair of whalebone boots, and then began to make for her a white dress. When Owl wanted to fit the dress, Raven hopped about and would not sit still. Owl became very angry and said, "If I fly over you with a blubber lamp, don't jump." Raven continued to hop about. At last, Owl became very angry and emptied the blubber lamp over the new white dress. Raven cried, "Crack! Crack!" Ever since that day, Raven has been black all over. Cradle Song, Modoc. Early in the morning, robin will he dance. Early, early will it pick at the cedar tree. Early in the morning it chatters, chip whip, chick, chitch, chick, chick. Wood rat and rabbits, Modoc. A wood rat lived with its mother. 5 cottontail rabbits lived nearby. Rat said to Rabbit, "Let us have a quarrel." Rabbit said, "Why do you want to quarrel with me?" Wood rat replied, "Oh, that's all right. Let us have a fuss. Don't you always prefer the bitter leaves of some sort of cabbage to anything else?" Rabbit answered, "You must be a thief. Only yesterday I saw you watching carefully for the right moment to steal something. Your big ears were bent sideways." Wood rat replied, "And you, I see, always skipping about with your crooked legs to snatch leaves from the cabbage bush." Rabbit said, "You are an old fool. You are good for nothing except to eat holes in your grandmother's dress. That is why you want to attack me." Wood rat went to a distance and spread out a net to catch Rabbit. Then he seized a stick, drove Rabbit into the net, and beat him to death. Wood rat went to the second rabbit. "Let us have a fight." "Why should we fight?" asked second rabbit. They fought because second rabbit said Wood rat ate up his grandmother's long dress. Wood rat went to third rabbit. "You are nothing but a fool, a good-for-nothing eater of cabbage leaves," said Wood rat. Rabbit answered, "You are a thief. You live in an old wooden shed." So Wood rat started a quarrel with all the cottontail rabbits. Thus Wood rat killed all 5 cottontail rabbits. Then Wood rat and his mother ate them up. They danced over them a medicine dance. While they danced, Wood rat's wooden lodge caught fire. Thus Wood rat and his mother were burned to death. This is the end of the tale. Quarrel of Sun and Moon, Siuan. In the days of the first grandfather, Niaba the moon and me, the sun, lived upon the earth. Then they quarreled. Said Niaba, "I am out of patience with you. I gather the people, but you scatter them. You cause them to be lost." Said me, the sun, "I wish for many people to grow, so I scatter them. You put them in darkness. Thus you kill many with hunger." Then me called to the people, "Ho, ye who are people, many of you shall grow strong. I will look down on you from above. I will rule all your work." Said Niaba, "And I too will dwell above you. I will gather you when it is dark. Assembling in full numbers, you shall sleep. I myself will rule all your work. We will walk in the trail, one after the other. I will walk behind him." So Niaba follows me in the trail in the sky. Niaba is just like a woman. She always walks with a kettle on her arm. Chinook Wind, Yakima. Once 5 brothers lived on Great River. They were the Chinook brothers, and they caused the warm wind to blow. There were 5 other brothers who lived on Great River. They lived at Walla Walla, the meeting of the waters. They caused the cold wind to blow. Now the grandparents of all these brothers lived at Umatilla, the place of wind-drifted sands. Walla Walla brothers and Chinook brothers were always fighting. They made the winds to sweep over the country. They blew down trees and raised great clouds of dust. They froze the rivers and thawed them so as to make floods. It was very hard for the people. At last Walla Walla brothers said to Chinook brothers, "We will wrestle with you. Whoever falls down shall have his head cut off. Thus he shall be dead." So Coyote was made judge. He was also to cut the heads off those who fell down. Now Coyote secretly told the grandparents of Chinook brothers how to throw oil on the ground. Then their sons would not fall. Coyote also secretly told the grandparents of Walla Walla brothers to throw ice on the ground. Then their sons would not fall. The oil and the ice made the ground very slippery, but the Walla Walla grandparents had thrown ice on the ground last, so Chinook brothers fell down. First one fell and then another until all fell down. Then Coyote cut off their heads. Now the oldest Chinook brother had a baby son. The baby's mother taught him he must revenge his father and uncles. So young Chinook grew very strong. At last he felt himself very strong. He could pull up large fir trees and throw them around like weeds. Then young Chinook went up Great River. Wherever he went, he pulled up large fir trees and threw them around like weeds. In the valley of the Yakima, he turned aside and went to sleep by Sitas, the creek. The mark of his sleeping place can still be seen on the mountainside. Then young Chinook came back to the Great River and went to Umatilla, the place of wind-drifted sands. Here he found his grandparents very cold and hungry. Walla Walla brothers caused the northeast wind to blow all the time. They also stole their fish when they were returning to the shore. Always they stole the fish. Young Chinook said, "We will go fishing now." So grandfather started out to fish. Young Chinook lay down in the bottom of the boat. When the boat was full of fish, grandfather started back for the shore. Then Walla Walla brothers started out from the shore to rob grandfather, but they could not catch the boat. Every time Walla Walla brothers came near the boat, it would shoot ahead. So grandfather reached the shore with his fish. Then young Chinook took his grandparents to the river and bathed them. All the straw and grass and bark which he washed off became trout. That is how trout came to be in Great River. Now Walla Walla brothers knew that young Chinook was alive. They sent a messenger to him. They said, "We will wrestle with you. Whoever falls down shall have his head cut off. Thus he shall be dead." So Coyote was made judge. He was also to cut off the heads of those who fell down. Now Coyote secretly told the grandparents of Walla Walla brothers to throw ice on the ground. Coyote also secretly told the grandparents of young Chinook to throw oil on the ground. But he told them to throw oil last. So young Chinook wrestled with Walla Walla brothers one after another. So the Walla Walla brothers fell to the ground. First one fell and then another until 4 had fallen. Then Coyote cut off their heads. The 5th one yielded without wrestling, so Coyote let him live. But Coyote said, "You must blow only lightly. You must never freeze people again." To young Chinook, Coyote said, "You shall blow hardest only at night. You shall blow first on the mountain ridges to warn the people." Thus now winter is only a little cold. The Miser of Tacoma, Cowlitz. Long, long ago, Miser lived near the foot of Tacoma. He never was happy. When food was scarce and the tribe were starving, Miser could find fish in secret places in the streams. When the snows were deep and the black-necked elk hid in the dark places of the forest, he could still secure meat. His skill as a hunter and fisherman was known to all his tribe. But Miser cared only for Hiqua. Now Moose Moose the elk was Miser's tomanawus. Therefore he tried to talk with the elk, even while hunting them. He wanted more Hiqua. One night Moose Moose whispered to Miser the secret hiding place of the Hiqua of the Tomanowos. The hiding place was high up in Tacoma. Early in the morning, Miser began to make ready for his search. He sent his klutchman to dig camas roots. Thus he could work secretly. He made 2 elk horn picks by taking off all the prongs except the upper ones. He filled his ikta with kinnikinnick and with dried salmon. At sunset, Miser began to climb the mountain. All night he climbed the trail. All the next day he climbed. By night again he was above the snow line, cold and tired and hungry. When the moon rose, he climbed again. Over vast snow fields, across wide cracks in the ice, over the slippery shoulders of the lower peaks, he climbed. At sunrise, he reached the top. Now Tacoma was the home of the Tomanawus, therefore Miser was afraid. But Moose Moose had told him where the Hiqua was hidden. In the white snow field which covered the crater was a black lake. Beyond it were 3 stones of equal height, all as tall as a giant. The top of the first was shaped like a salmon's head, the top of the second was like a camas root, and the third like an elk's head. Then Miser believed the voice of Moose Moose. Miser threw down his ikta. He unwrapped his elkhorn pick. Then he began to dig in the snow at the foot of the elk's head. Miser struck the first blow. As an echo, he heard a sudden puff. Startled, he turned to see a huge otter climbing out of the black waters of the lake. Big Otter struck his tail with a loud thump on the snow. Another otter appeared, then another. At last 12 otters gathered in a circle around their huge leader. They formed a circle around Miser, digging with his pick at the foot of the elk's head. Then Big Otter leaped to the top of the elk's head. All the otters gave a loud puff. Miser kept digging. At every 13th blow of the pick, Big Otter thumped with his tail on the elk's head. Then the circle of 12 thumped with theirs on the snow. Miser became tired and stopped digging for a moment. Big Otter turned on the elk's head. With his tail, he struck Miser on the shoulder. Then the 12 turned, walked backward, and struck him with their tails. Miser began to dig again. As he dug in the rock, his pick broke. Big Otter jumped from the elk's head. He seized the second pick in his mouth and gave it to him. Miser dared not stop. With each 13th blow of the pick and the thump of the tails, the otters came nearer. He could feel their breath as he lifted the last stone. Beneath lay a great hole filled with hiqua. As he lifted out the shells, the otters returned to their large circle. Miser lifted out handful after handful of the shell money. He strung the hiqua on elk sinews, 20 strings in all. The rest he covered again. He hurried, for it was afternoon, and he must return below the snow line. Then Miser left the elk's head. He offered no shells to Moose Moose or to Sahil. He had forgotten the Tomanaus. As he crossed the crater, the otters, one by one, with a loud puff, jumped into the black lake. They began to beat the black water with their tails. He heard them beat the water as he plunged through the snow to the edge of the crater. Miser felt that the shells were very heavy. As he stepped over the edge of the crater, he glanced back. The 3 stones had vanished. A thick mist rose from the black waters of the lake. Under the mist was a black cloud hiding the water. Miser feared Tomanaus in the clouds. Then the storm seized him. It flung him over an ice bank. The blackness of all darkness lay around him. Kolnas, the storm god, came down upon the mountain. Tuta, the thunder, deafened him with its roar. The storm crashed about him. Fiery blasts melted the snow into great torrents. Icy winds froze them solid again. In the roar and thunder, Miser heard the voice of Kakete, highest Tomanaos. Heard also the voices of all the Tomanaos, ha-ha, hiqua, ha-ha, hiqua. Miser threw away a string of hiqua. The storm slackened for a moment, then all began again, louder than ever. Kakete screamed, ha-ha, hiqua, ha-ha, hiqua. One by one, Miser threw away the strings of hiqua strung on the sinews of Moose Moose the elk. Always the Tomanaos screamed after him. Then, when the last string was gone, with a last gust, the storm blew him down, flat upon the ground. Miser slept a long time. When he awoke, Tacoma glistened above him, shining white in the sunlight. All around him grew camas roots. Rocky ridges lay where once the forest had stretched. Sunny meadows lay around him. Miser stretched himself and rose. Only dry leaves and dead grass remained in the rotted ikta. Miser wondered. Then he went down the mountainside. He ate berries for food until he came to a cabin in the valley. There lived a very old woman. He talked with her and found she was his Kluchman. Kluchman said he had slept 30 snows. Miser looked at himself in a pool. He was very old. His hair was white. Many, many snows had the angry Tomanaos made him sleep. But Miser was happy. He no longer cared for hiqua. End of section 2. Part 3 of Myths and Legends of the Pacific Northwest by Catherine Barry Judson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 3. Why There Are No Snakes on Tacoma. A long time ago, Tai Sahel became angry with the people. Sahel ordered a medicine man to take his bow and arrow and shoot into the cloud which hung low over Tacoma. The medicine man shot the arrow, and it stuck fast in the cloud. Then he shot another one into the lower end of the first. Then he shot another into the lower end of the second. He shot arrows until he had made a chain which reached from the cloud to the earth. The medicine man told his klootchman and his children to climb up the arrow trail. Then he told the good animals to climb up the arrow trail. Then the medicine man climbed up himself. Just as he was climbing into the cloud, he looked back. A long line of bad animals and snakes were also climbing up the arrow trail. Therefore the medicine man broke the chain of arrows. Thus the snakes and bad animals fell down on the mountainside. Then at once it began to rain. It rained until all the land was flooded. Water reached even to the snow line of Tacoma. When all the bad animals and snakes were drowned, it stopped raining. After a while the water sank again. Then the medicine man and his klootchman and the children climbed out of the cloud and came down the mountainside. The good animals also climbed out of the cloud. Thus there are now no snakes or bad animals on Tacoma. Cry because he had no wife. Nez Perce. Once there was a little boy. He was an orphan. This boy cried day and night and would never be quiet. His grandmother asked him one day, "What makes you cry?" He said, "I cry because I want a wife." Now his grandparents knew of a girl who lived toward the east, and they sent him there. As he went along the trail, he came to a giant's house. He went in to see the giant, who asked him to stay to breakfast. The giant had 5 roasts on the fire. He had 4 large roasts and 1 small one. He said to the boy, "Pick out the roast you want for breakfast." The boy picked out the small roast. Now the 4 large roasts were the legs of people that the giant had killed. The small one was venison. The boy knew this from what his grandmother had told him. She said, "Never eat too much." After breakfast he went on. On the road he came to a great rock cliff. Its name was Cliff Giant, and it crushed people. The other giant had told him of this one and how to get by it. He had said, "Turn yourself into a little dog and very slowly follow the trail under the rock cliff. Keep your eye on Rock Cliff. When you see it move, run fast." He did this and escaped. And then he went on. He could see at a distance the place where the girl lived. Until he came in sight of this lodge, he had never left off crying. Now, this girl had a great horse which would kill people before they could reach her lodge. That was her guard. The boy picked up 2 large stones and ran, still crying, toward the lodge. The animal ran at the boy, but the boy spat all over one of the stones. When the horse came close, he threw the stone behind him. Then the horse stopped to stamp on the stone, and the boy ran on. He was almost in reach of the lodge when he threw the other stone. The horse stopped to stamp on that, and the boy reached the lodge and jumped in. Very soon the girl entered. She knew him at once and called him by name, Iwapnet Atsikti, Cry because he had no wife. She talked to him and asked him if he wanted a bath. So she built a fire, heated water, and prepared him a bath. When he had taken the bath, he became of man's size. Next morning they started toward his home. When they reached this, his grandparents were very old, because he had been gone many years. The girl said to her husband, "You tell your grandparents to do nothing wrong tonight. If they obey, I will give them a bath that will make them young again." In the morning she did so, but they had not obeyed her directions, so they did not become young again. The next night they were both dead. Then the girl and her husband started for her old home. They rode back on the great horse, but he did not go very well. They made a whip out of black haw. The whip said to them, I can outlast all other whips. They made a whip out of smoke wood, coyote rope. This whip said, when the giant gets too close, throw me down and I will tangle up the giant. They made a whip out of mud. This whip said, throw me down and I will mire the giant. They made a whip out of slide rock. This whip said, throw me down and the giant will have trouble in getting by. They made a whip out of red haw. This whip said, throw me down and I will tear the giant's flesh. They made a whip out of big mountains. This whip said, throw me down and the giant will not be able to get past me. When they had finished all the whips, they started to pass the giant's house. The giant rushed out and cried, give me your wife. The boy answered, get me a drink of water and I will give you my wife. When the giant went to get the water, the boy whipped up the horse and hurried on. They had gone some ways when the giant came out. They threw down the whip of black haw. He almost overtook them, and they threw down the whip of smoke wood. It tangled up the giant until they got away. When the giant almost overtook them again, they threw down the mud whip, and he was mired. When the giant almost overtook them the fourth time, they threw down the slide rock whip, and the giant had great trouble in getting by. When the giant almost overtook them the fifth time, they threw down the red haw whip, and it tore the flesh of the giant. And when the giant almost overtook them the sixth time, they threw down the whip of high mountains, and he could not cross it. Thus they escaped. How Coyote got his cunning. Shastan. Long, long ago, Chariya, Old Man Above, made first the fishes, then the lower animals. Afterwards he made a man. Chariya ordered the man to decide the rank of the animals. The man said he would give to each a bow. By the length of the bow given him would each animal know his rank. The next day, when the sun was new, would man give away the bows. Coyote listened. If he received the longest bow, he would be the most important animal. He decided not to sleep. He would be the first one at the meeting place when the day was new. Night owl hooted, wolf howled in the darkness, and bat flitted over his head. Coyote slept not. Robin chirped and thrush sang when the day was new, and Coyote slept. So Coyote was last to reach the man and received the shortest bow of all. So Coyote became the meanest of all animals. But in his distress, Coyote howled to the man, and he, in turn, appealed to Old Man Above. Chariya ordered that Coyote should be the most cunning of all animals, and so he is to this day. The naming of creation, Nez Perce. Coyote was chief of all the animals. Now he told them that the tribes of men were coming near, one and all. Everything he told them came true. Then he said, tomorrow the people will come out of the ground. I will name them, and they will spread out. Then he named them. He named them until he had named them all. And the people came out, but Coyote had no name for himself. Many people came out. Then he named himself Coyote. Thus came people, not we alone, but all people. The Bird Chief. They called all the birds. They said, the bird which, flying farthest, can reach the upper world, shall be chief. All the birds high in the air went to equal heights. Now Wren sat beneath the thick feathers of Eagle's wing. He sat there as Eagle flew. The birds, all wing-tired, returned to earth. Only Eagle went above. When Eagle had gone as high as he would, Wren flew beyond him. When the birds had returned below, they waited. Eagle returned alone after a long time. They counted the birds. Behold, Wren only, he had not returned. They waited for him. At length, after a long time, he returned. Eagle was too highly thinking of himself, when behold, Wren was made chief. The spell of the laughing raven. Klamath. At Dance Place, when the Klamath Lake people danced, many people were there. Kemush, Old Man of the Ancients, went there. Then Old Raven laughed at them, laughed when they danced, and all people dancing there became rocks. Grey Wolf entered Kitty above from the north. There he stopped and lay down, although not yet having reached his home. In full dress at that spot, moccasins with beads on toe stopped and rested. Then Old Grizzly approached Old Grey Wolf while lying asleep, and Old Grizzly stole from Grey Wolf his moccasins, beads also, and put them on to go to the fishing place. Upon this, Old Grey Wolf, waking up, threw Old Grizzly downhill. He rolled him down over the rocks for having robbed him of moccasins and beads also. Thus killed he Old Grizzly. Upon this, the Klamath Lake people began fighting the Northerners because Old Grizzly had been killed by Old Grey Wolf. Then Old Raven laughed at them when fighting, and they became rocks. Origin of the Thunderbird. Long, long ago, To-u-Luks, South Wind, traveled to the north. There To-u-Luks met Quetzalcoatl, the giantess. To-u-Luks said, "I am hungry. Give me something to eat." Quetzalcoatl said, "I have nothing to eat. You can get food by fishing." So South Wind dragged the net. He caught Tanase-Kole. He caught a little whale. South Wind took his stone knife to kill the whale. Then the giantess said, "Use a sharp shell. Do not use your knife. Slit Tanase-Kole down the back. Do not cut him crossways." South Wind pretended not to hear. South Wind cut the whale across the back. Suddenly the fish changed into an immense bird. The bird's wings darkened the sun. The flapping of its wings shook the earth. This bird was the Thunderbird. He flew to the north and lighted on Swalahost, near the mouth of Great River. Then South Wind and the giantess traveled north to find him. One day, picking berries, Quetzalcoatl found the nest of Thunderbird. The nest was full of eggs. Quetzalcoatl broke one egg. It was not good, so she threw it down the mountainside. Before it reached the valley, it became an Indian. Quetzalcoatl threw down other eggs. Each egg became an Indian. That is how the Chehalis Indians were created. Indians never cut the first salmon across the back. If they did, the salmon would not run. Always Indians slit the first salmon down the back. Mount Edgecombe, Alaska. When all the world was covered with rising waters, Cheetal, Thunder, left his sister Abishanaku, the underground woman. Cheetal said, "Sister, you shall never see me again. You shall only hear my voice." He put on the skin of a great bird and flew away. His eyes flashed fire, and the earth shook when he flapped his wings. Abashnikoi, the underground woman, climbed to the top of Mount Edgecombe. The top opened, and she fell in, leaving a great hole. The world is an immense plate resting on a tall pillar. The underground woman holds up the pillar so the plate will not fall. When storms break on Mount Edgecombe, the lightning from Cheetal's eyes gleams through her crater windows. The flapping of his wings makes the plate tremble, and she hears the thundering of his voice, but she never sees Cheetal. An Indian's vow to the thunder gods. Footnote: as related by Alice C. Fletcher, used by permission. This incident is not a myth, it is actual fact. It is included because it throws light upon the softer side of Indian character, and because it shows also the extent to which the Indian was influenced by the religious beliefs which we term myths. End footnote. To an Indian woman, the thunder had spoken in a vision. To this god she promised to give her firstborn child. When she became a mother, she forgot in her joy that the life of her little child did not belong to her, nor did she recall her fateful vow until one bright spring day when the clouds gathered and she heard the roll of the thunder, a sound which summoned all persons consecrated to these gods to bring their offerings and to pay their vows. She remembered what she had promised, but her heart forbade her to lay the infant, which was smiling in her arms, upon the cloud-swept hilltop. She pressed the baby to her breast and waited in silence the passing of the gods in the storm. The following spring, when the first thunder pealed, she did not forget her vow, but she could not gather strength to fulfill it. Another year passed, and again the thunder sounded. Taking the toddling child by the hand, the mother climbed the hill, and when the top was reached, she placed it on the ground and fled. But the boy scrambled up and ran after her, and his frightened cry stayed her feet. He caught her garments and clung to them, and although the thunder called, she could not obey. Her vow had been made before she knew the strength of a mother's love. Gathering the boy within her arms, she hid herself and him from the presence of the gods. The storm passed, and the mother and child returned to the lodge, but fear had taken possession of her. She watched her son with eyes in which terror and love struggled for mastery. One day, as the little one played beside a rippling brook, laughing and singing in his glee, suddenly the clouds gathered. The flashing lightning sent beast and bird to cover and drove the mother out to find her child. She heard his voice above the fury of the storm, calling to her. As she neared the brook, a vivid flash blinded her eyes. For a moment she was stunned, but recovering, she pushed on, only to be appalled by the sight that met her eye. Her boy lay dead, struck by the thunder gods who had claimed their own. No other children came to lighten the sorrow of the lonely woman, but every spring, when the first thunder sounded, and whenever the storm swept the land, this stricken mother climbed the hills, and there, standing alone, with hands uplifted to the black rolling clouds, she sang her song of sorrow and fealty. Many years ago the writer met her and heard her song. She was an old, old woman. She is now at rest, and let us hope that her lifelong sorrow has turned to joy. The words of her song express her fidelity, and the music betrays her love and sorrow. Flying, flying, sweeping, swirling, they return, the thunder gods. To me they come, to me their own. Me they behold, who am their own. On wings they come, flying, flying, sweeping, swirling, they return, the thunder gods. Chinook Ghosts. Chinook. The ghosts wanted to buy a wife. They bought Blue Jay's sister, Eoi. They came in the evening, and on the next morning Eoi had disappeared. Now Blue Jay was a wise bird, a foe to magic. After a year, Blue Jay said, "I am going to search for Eoi." Blue Jay asked all the trees, "Where do people go when they die?" They did not answer. Then Blue Jay asked all the birds, "Where do people go when they die?" They did not answer. At last Blue Jay said to his wedge, "Where do people go when they die?" Wedge said, "Pay me, and I will tell you." Blue Jay paid him, and Wedge took him on a journey. They arrived at a large village. The last lodge was very large. Smoke was rising only from this lodge. There Blue Jay found Eoi. When Eoi saw Blue Jay, she said, "Where did you come from?" Blue Jay said, "I am not dead. Wedge brought me here. Are you dead?" Then Blue Jay opened all the lodges, and he saw that they were full of bones. He saw a skull and bones close to Eoi. He said, "What are you going to do with that skull?" Eoi said, "That is my husband." When it grew dark, the bones became alive. Blue Jay asked, "Where did all these people come from?" Eoi said, "Do you think they are people? They are ghosts." After some time, Eoi said to him, "Go with those people fishing with a dip net." He went with a young boy. The people spoke always in very low tones, and he did not understand them. Eoi told him to speak in low tones. When they were going fishing in their canoe, another canoe came down the river. The people in it were singing. Blue Jay began to sing too, and at once the boy became a skeleton. Blue Jay stopped singing, and the boy became a ghost again. When Blue Jay spoke in loud tones, the boy always became a skeleton. The ghosts caught leaves and branches in the dip net. These branches and leaves were their trout and salmon. Blue Jay shouted often, and all the ghosts became skeletons. One day, when all the ghosts were bones, Blue Jay changed their skulls. He put children's skulls on old people. Therefore the ghosts disliked him. They told Eoi to send him back, but he did not know in what to go. Their canoes were full of holes and covered with moss. So Eoi sent Blue Jay home, but he did not follow her directions. Therefore he died and became a ghost. He returned to the ghost land and found all the bones were real men. The leaves and branches were real salmon and trout, and all their canoes were new. The Memaloose Islands. Klickitat. Long ago, before the white man came, a young chief and a maiden loved one another. Suddenly the chief went over the spirit trail, but he could find no rest in the land of the spirits. The maiden also grieved for him. Then a vision came to the maiden. It told her to go to the land of the spirits. The maiden told her father of the vision, and they both obeyed. The father made ready a canoe, placed her in it, and they paddled up Great River to the Spirit Island. Through the darkness, as they neared the Death Island, they heard singing and the tom-tom of the dance drum. 4 spirit people met them on the shore. The maiden landed, but the father returned. At the great dance house, the maiden met her lover, more beautiful than on earth. All night long they danced. Then, when morning came and the robins chirped, the dancers fell asleep. The maiden slept, but not soundly. When the sun was high, she awoke. All around her were skeletons and skulls. Her lover, with grinning teeth, was gazing upon her. The maiden was in the island of the dead. Struck with horror, she ran to the shore. At last she found an old boat and paddled herself across Great River to the Indian village. But her father was frightened. She had been to the spirit land. Therefore, if she returned, evil would fall upon the tribe. That night again the father made ready a canoe and paddled across the river to the Memaloose Island. Through the darkness they heard singing and the tom-tom of the dance drum. In course of time, a baby, half human, half spirit, was born. The spirit lover wished his mother to see it. He sent a messenger to her, telling her to come to the island by night. He told her, when she arrived, not to look at the baby until it was 10 days old. After the old woman reached the Memaloose Island, she became impatient. She lifted the cloth from the baby's face. She lifted just one little corner and looked at the baby's face. Therefore the baby died. Thus the spirit people became displeased. They said that never again should living people visit the land of those who had gone by the spirit trail. A visiting ghost. Teton. Once a young brave came to a great forest just at nightfall. He was alone, so he lay down at the edge of the woods. At midnight he heard a woman cry, "My son, my son!" Then he heard the breaking of twigs. Thus the warrior knew that someone was approaching. The warrior put brush on his fire. Then he peeped through a hole in his blanket. A woman was approaching. She wore a skin dress with long fringe. She wore also a blanket drawn over her head. Her leggings were decorated with beadwork and porcupine quills. The woman came to where the warrior lay with his legs stretched out. She took his foot and raised it, and then she dropped it. Twice the woman did this, then she drew a rusty knife. The warrior sprang up. He shouted, "What are you doing?" Then he shot at her suddenly. The woman ran away screaming, "Yun, yun, yun!" When daylight came, the warrior saw he had camped near a scaffold grave. Therefore he said, "This is the ghost which came to me." Origin of the tribes, Chinook. Long ago in Lake Cle Elum lived Wishpoosh, the monster beaver. Cle Elum was beautiful. It was also full of fish. The animal people wanted to fish there, but Wishpoosh killed them. Wishpoosh dragged them into the water and drowned them. Wishpoosh also killed and ate the animal people. At last Coyote tried to kill him. Coyote fastened a spear to his wrist with a strong cord. Then he began to fish in the lake. Soon Wishpoosh attacked him. Coyote speared the beaver. Then Wishpoosh plunged to the bottom of Cle Elum and dragged Coyote with him. But Coyote fought hard with Wishpoosh. They fought so hard they tore out the banks of Cle Elum. The waters rushed through the break, then through the mountains and down the canyon. They rushed into Kittitas Valley. The water formed another lake in Kittitas Valley. Coyote and Wishpoosh fought so hard they tore out the banks of the new lake. The waters rushed down into the basin of the Cowitch, Natchez, and Athenum. The water formed a larger lake. Yakima was flooded, and a very great lake formed at Toppenish. Coyote and Wishpoosh fought so hard that they tore out the banks of this very great lake. The waters rushed to the meeting place of the Yakima, the Snake, and the Columbia rivers. The waters here formed a very, very great lake. Coyote and Wishpoosh fought so hard that even the banks of this lake were torn out. Then Wishpoosh dashed down the great river. Coyote was out of breath. Coyote wanted to stop Wishpoosh. He caught at the trees and stones along the banks of the great river. Nothing could stop Wishpoosh. At last Coyote and the beaver reached the breakers at the mouth of Great River, reached the breakers of the bitter waters. Wishpoosh was very angry. He killed salmon and swallowed them. He killed whales and swallowed them. Coyote saw that Wishpoosh was very strong. Then he remembered that he was Coyote, the wisest and cunningest of all the animals. So Coyote changed himself into a branch, a tree branch. He drifted toward Wishpoosh. Wishpoosh swallowed him. Then Coyote changed himself back into Coyote again. He took his stone knife. He cut the sinews inside of Wishpoosh. Thus Wishpoosh died. Now Coyote was very tired. Therefore he asked Muskrat to help him. Together Coyote and Muskrat pulled the great beaver to land. Then they cut up Wishpoosh. They threw pieces over the land. From the head of Wishpoosh, Coyote made the Nez Perces, great in council. From the arms he made the cayuses, powerful with the bow and war club. From the legs he made the Klickitats, famous runners. From the ribs he made the Yakimas. From the belly he made the Chinooks, short, fat people with big stomachs. Coyote at last had only the hair and blood of Wishpoosh. These he flung far up the valley to the east. They became the Snake River Indians, a tribe of war and blood. Thus Coyote created the tribes. Then he returned up the Columbia. Now in making the Chinooks and the coast tribes, Coyote forgot to give them any mouth. The god Ekani, traveling along, noticed this. Then Ekani called the tribes to him, and with a stone knife gave each one a mouth. But for fun, Ekani cut them crooked. He made some mouths very big. Thus the coast tribes have not perfect mouths. End of Part 3.